name is Dr. Joanne Moreau. I will be the host for this event that's being presented by the Office of Alumni Relations, Women in Medicine, and the University of Rochester Women's Network. I am a current member of the School of Medicine and Dentry's Women in Medicine Committee. I graduated from the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry in 2007. I then completed a pediatric residency followed by an allergy and immunology fellowship. And I'm currently actually an allergist practicing in Brooklyn, New York. I am co-creator of the My COVID MD initiative, which was established to ensure that historically marginalized and under-resourced populations in the United States receive equitable and holistic care. Our organization has provided access to COVID-19 testing and vaccination, as well as wraparound services to disenfranchised communities. And we do this mainly by working with community leaders, because we believe it's all about investing in people and working collaboratively to find solutions, much like the University of Rochester has actually trained us. Before we get started, I'd like to share some quick Zoom housekeeping reminders with all of you. This event will be recorded. Please place yourself on mute when not speaking so that we can hear what our great panelists have to say. I would recommend the speaker view for the best experience for this evening. You can raise your hand or use the chat feature for any comments and questions. We anticipate a 30 to 40-minute panel discussion with time for audience question and answers during the sessions and at the end. However, before I introduce you to our great panelists, I want to share a little more with you about the university's Global Women's Network and our Women in Medicine's Network for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. This has been an exciting period of opportunity and progress for women at the university. As many of you know, the University of Rochester is proud to have 6 women deans, along with the first women university president, Sarah Mangelsdorf. The university-wide Women's Network was launched to include our very own Women in Medicine Network. It's currently under the leadership of committee co-chairs, Dr. Heidi Schwartz and Dr. Allison Ramsey. This initiative has a mission to harness and celebrate the rich contributions of women around the globe who are part of the University of Rochester family. Our goal is to help members connect and support one another in their education and careers through dynamic programming and engaging conversations. And the Women in Medicine is actually part of that mission. We want to highlight our successes, we're trying to build bridges, and we would also like to share resources among fellow women alumni who span a variety of specialties across the country, as well as with our University of Rochester students. We have had several successful events thus far, both in person and virtually, and we hope to continue that. Our Women in Medicine Network is continuing to grow, and we have an expanded audience of alumni across the country. We are in the midst of planning for the 2022 programming, and we would appreciate your input so this way we can make it what you would like to see. The purpose of this event is to highlight the unique experiences and careers of 3 veteran women leaders in both education and medicine. And so allow me to introduce you to our distinguished panelists. First is Dr. Ruth O'Regan, who is the new chair of medicine and the Charles A. Dewey professor at the University of Rochester School of Medicine. She is the first woman to hold this role. Additionally, Dr. O'Regan serves as a physician-in-chief of Strong Memorial Hospital and as an associate director of education and mentoring at the Wilmot Cancer Institute at University of Rochester. Dr. O'Regan is highly regarded for her work as a clinician, mentor, and breast cancer researcher. She has held numerous key leadership roles in hematology and medical oncology research, as well as education. Her research includes identifying mechanisms of resistance to breast cancer therapies and the development of new therapies with a specific focus on triple-negative breast cancer. Welcome to Dr. O'Regan. Our second panelist is Dr. Adrienne Morgan, who is the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at the University of Rochester Medical Center and Senior Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. Dr. Morgan is also an associate professor in the Division of Medical Humanities and Bioethics in the Medical Center, where she teaches a medical humanities seminar focusing on anti-racism. She is also an associate professor at the Warner School of Education. As one of the chief architects of the University of Rochester Medical Center Equity and Anti-Racism Action Plan, which was unveiled last year, Dr. Morgan works with residents, fellows, and faculty to identify and address challenges and solutions for greater diversity and inclusivity throughout the university. She is a veteran in leading community health partnerships with over 20 years of hands-on experiences, overseeing a variety of successful initiatives. So we welcome Dr. Morgan. And then next we have Dr. Carol C. Nadelson, who is celebrating her 60th reunion, which is amazing, from the University of Rochester School of Medicine this year. She's well known as a pioneer and trailblazer for women in medicine for decades and is a national and international leader in psychiatry. She is the founding director of the Partners in Brigham Women's Hospital Office for Women's Careers and professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. She has also been professor of psychiatry and vice chair of the psychiatry department at Tufts University School of Medicine. Dr. Nadelson has been a powerful influence on policy related to women since her academic career began at Massachusetts Mental Health Center and Boston's Beth Israel Hospital. Dr. Nadelson was the first woman president of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society and the American Psychiatric Association. She has been president of the Association for Academic Psychiatry, the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry, the American College of Psychoanalysts, and she was an editor-in-chief and CEO of American Psychiatric Press Incorporated. She has served on several boards, including the Society for Women's Health Research, the boards of American Psychiatric Association, and the Foundation for a History of Women in Medicine. So we have an amazing group of people. We welcome Dr. Nadelson, and let's get started. And the first question is for Dr. Nadelson. You graduated from the School of Medicine 60 years ago when only a few women were in medical school across the country, and including here at University of Rochester. The medical school classes are now about 50%, but interestingly, when you were in school, there were only 2 women in your class. So what would you say were some of the biggest challenges, both personally and professionally, that you faced in the early years of your education as well as in your career? Dr. Nadelson?
She's muted.
May you please unmute yourself, Dr. Nadelson?
There we go. Should be. Okay. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes.
Well, I'll go way back so I can move fast through it. But basically, I started out in my family being a stubborn child, which meant I would fuss about anything that I didn't want to do. And I started thinking about medicine very early in my life, and it had to do really with the fact that my grandfather had developed lung cancer, and I used to spend some time with him. I was probably 10 or 11 at the time, and I used to read to him. And I decided I was going to cure cancer.
Huh.
So that's what I told everybody, and nobody paid much attention to it at that time. But so that the backdrop of this is that most of the women I knew and people who were in my classes, I can say I was the only woman pre-med in my college with 200 men and me. But I sort of got used to it. It was the way it was, and the only thing you could do is change it. So you couldn't ask them to change because they weren't going to do it. And so there was always a lot of resistance, but I was always supported by my teachers. And only a few of my family members thought it was a good idea. But so that pattern continued. That was the way it was in college. That was the way it was in medical school. That was the way it was in residency and internship. You know, I really got used to dealing with it because it just seemed impossible to move some of that. But I found here at Rochester an enormous amount of support. And I had actually never thought of going into psychiatry until I met George Engel. And then it was normal to do that. He thought I should do it. So that I played with medicine and psychiatry for a long time before I decided on going into psychiatry. And the atmosphere in residency was the same. I was in a program that had 24 residents divided into 6 services. One service had, each service had 1 woman. That's the way it was, and it wasn't going to change. It took a long time for us to move that one. But what was also terribly important, and one of the reasons I changed hospitals when I was a resident, I went for my second part of my residency and fellowship to Beth Israel Hospital. Beth Israel Hospital had the first woman chair of psychiatry at Harvard, and one of the first women chair of anything at Harvard. And she was absolutely wonderful and ran a great department. And she captured the chief of medicine there, who went along with all of the changes she wanted to make, which were great. So that was the first time there was a major supportive atmosphere. But there were only 5 women in who were house officers at the whole hospital, which was quite huge. And so we used to sometimes have lunch together if we ever had a chance to have lunch. But we all realized at one point that we were all pregnant at the same time. And we stood there in absolute, it was hard to say how we felt, because we knew there was no, and there were no resources. Nobody heard of it. Nobody wanted to pay attention. And we decided that we had to do something, because how were we going to manage this? So we started a daycare center. It was a huge amount of work. We had a lot of support from our spouses and from some of the faculty. The women were particularly, the few that were particularly supportive, but in general, childcare was a no-no. That was seen as bad for children, and we were awful people. The only thing we got for our efforts was some furniture from the basement of Children's Hospital. We started, but we decided we had to do something. And I have to say, the end point of this is all of our children went to the daycare center, and the daycare center is still functioning in Brookline, Massachusetts, in the same building that it's at least 30 years or more. So that was the beginning of thinking about doing something that nobody else was going to do it. We just had to own up to the fact that the people who were close to us would work with us, and we could do it with them. And we got that support. We also made it a cooperative, and so nobody was really paid very much, because the tuition had to be very low, because we didn't have any money, and we all worked it out. It was just a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. O'Regan, I want to bring you in because you have a diverse background in medical research. And I'd like you to tell us more about the impact and value of women leaders in the field of medical research, especially given what Dr. Nadelson has just told us about the challenges that she had, during pregnancy and trying to maintain a family. Like, how do you actually balance these things in terms of like what you're doing in your life?
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Yeah, I think I'm going to say from the get-go that, what I've been going through my career, I wish there were more, females in research. I think it's changing over time. My background was that, I'm from Dublin originally. My dad was actually a researcher. He had a lab. And I came over to the US specifically to actually do research in oncology. So I was kind of on the same part as Dr. Nadelson. I have actually been in labs. I've always had male mentors or PIs in the lab. And then I have had labs myself. I will say, I think it really is it's somewhat of an uphill battle. I think I know many very successful female researchers, but I think the others would agree with me. I think it is harder being a woman in research. So we know, for example, that if you look at NIH funding, women actually are less likely to get funding than men. Likewise, if you submit, papers for publication, there's also a bias there as well. Now, I do think it's changing, and actually, I don't know how many people here have been recently on an NIH study section, but there actually is a mandatory implicit bias training before you take part in a panel now, which I was actually glad to see. It's actually a video it's kind of outrageous in some ways, but nonetheless, I think it gets the point home. I think overall things are definitely changing. I think if you go to national meetings now, I'm a breast oncologist, so not surprised there's a lot of women focused in research in that area. And I'm very happy to see when you go to national meetings now, there are probably more women on the podium than there are men. And of course, the thing that we really want to see is, female trainees and junior faculty up there. And I really do think that we're seeing that as well. So I think over time it's been changing, but being a basic researcher with a lab is really a very tough job because you're continuously trying to get funding and put papers in, and hopefully the bias will go away with time, but there's no question it exists.
Yeah, and you've been very successful with that up until this point, so we commend you for that. And then that actually ties into the question that we have for Dr. Morgan. Your career with the University of Rochester and University of Rochester Medical Center includes critical leadership roles, which are dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And can you explain more on what that means for women in medicine and how that impacts women in medicine? Oh, you're muted.
I know we've been doing this for how many years now, and still sometimes I forget to unmute myself, but thank you. It's a great question. And really, I think the misconception about diversity and equity and inclusion work is that it's really about Black and brown people. And when in reality, it's all encompassing. It's all about the intersections, the multiple identities that we all bring to the work that we're doing. And it's painstaking work, and it requires it for all of us to start looking inward and figuring out what we want, and about how we've been taught about differences and how we're going to reimagine and rethink the narratives that are out there now about the roles of women, the stereotypes around Black and brown people, people with differing abilities. So when we really talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this space, in academic medicine, we're talking about everybody and the work that we need to do. And when we do this work, if one group benefits, all the groups benefit. And so we need to remember who is not at the table, how our policies affect the kind of work that we're able to do, and how women are able to move up within the organization. So one of my favorite quotes is from James Baldwin, and he says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And right now in diversity, equity, inclusion, that relates to the work that we're doing here at the institution. It's about facing things that haven't been changed and what we're going to do to keep moving forward, particularly around our policies, because that is where the change happens. And it was so exciting to hear what Dr. Nadelson said about starting a daycare center so many decades ago. We still need to do that work now. And again, like I said, one group is lifted up, all the groups are lifted up. We're talking about families and women and men and how we all work together to move forward. And that's the work that we're trying to do right now in the space that we're doing it here. And so I hope that's reflected in the plan that we have put together and have put out over the next 5 years.
Oh, yeah, there's much that's needed to be done across the board for gender, racial, like there's just a whole bunch of people who are struggling right about now. And Dr. Nadelson, I'm going to bring it back to you because in addition to the daycare that you helped establish, which I mean, unfortunately, a lot of women are still dealing with this issue currently. We haven't moved that forward and you had graduated 60 years ago. So that does not say a lot about our current culture of medicine. But can you also share the origins of your work in support of women's mental health and crisis care for victims of rape, incest, and sexual harassment, as well as those who are suffering from postpartum depression and eating disorders, please?
Okay. Well, just to give you an example, when I started working in the psychiatry department with the other medical departments, I did what George Engel taught me about, consultation psychiatry, and we developed a whole lot of programs. But what we started to see, for example, in the emergency room, we were seeing rape victims constantly. We have a lot of colleges and students in the city of Boston. Most of them were young. They were students mostly, and there were no resources at all. And nobody, however, if you had money, there were ways you could manage that. And that's not the population we were dealing with. So we started a rape crisis center with the cooperation of the OBGYN department, which it really was extremely successful in trying to help people do what they felt they needed to do about it and to support them. And that took us to developing a program for pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy, particularly when, doing abortion was theoretically against the law. And it was in Massachusetts like every place else. However, it seemed to be a lot of people who were getting them. And so we had a dodge that was built into the system that we didn't know about until we were in it, which was we had therapeutic abortions. And that had to do with if you had a medical, especially psychiatric problem, then it was no problem. It was no problem because we could sign off on the diagnosis and it could be done in all the hospitals, and it grew in all the hospitals in Boston. So those were two examples of where the women faculty, the group of us got together and we tried to change things. And we were impressed with the support we got. People relaxed a little bit and we were able to get people to work with us on some of these programs. And that was very rewarding. 2 examples.
Thank you. And Dr. O'Regan, I'm going to bring it back to you because you had said that, things are changing slowly but surely, but, clearly there is just a gamut of men and very few women, but you've actually managed to have a successful career as both a clinician and a research investigator, which is actually quite difficult. So if you can please share with us like how that duality has actually informed your role as the first woman chair of medicine and how that actually impacts how you mentor.
Yeah, so I have had a number of leadership positions in mentorship. So I was the vice chair for education at Emory. I was also the fellowship director at Emory, and over the time I was there, we did manage to recruit a number of female trainees, many of whom went on to very successful academic careers. So I always think about everything we do is kind of those 3 pillars of clinical care, taking care of the patient, which is obviously so important. And obviously that's how we do clinical research, research, and then of course education. So I think it's a matter of kind of knitting it all together. And I think for female faculty in particular, I think that they sometimes need a lot of encouragement. They think they can't do it. And I think, being a role model for those female faculties is really of, critical importance to me. And hopefully I've done a good job of that. I think there's certain things that I've noticed, in my role when I was over the hematology oncology division, at Wisconsin. What I noticed was there was a lot of female faculty who were, researchers and clinicians who were part-time, but they were like 80% or 90%. Well, we know that they're not really, because the other 10% or 20%, they're working, right, doing their notes or whatever. So, I encouraged them to, go to 100%. And I think that really helped because it gave them more time to work on research. Now I'm really more of a clinical researcher, so putting patients on trials and running clinical trials. But for me, what's very important is that you hand things on, so you don't have to be the person that runs the trial. You hand it on to somebody else. And because I'm in the world of breast cancer, many of the principal investigators that I've kind of worked with on trials have been females. And again, like I said, seeing them on the podium presenting and getting publications is just the best gift ever.
Oh, great. And yeah, I think that's really important to notice about, like, encouragement is definitely something that's needed both for ourselves and for others. And then also delegation. I think we all have a tendency to just want to do everything ourselves because either we don't trust other people to do it or we just want to get stuff done. And I think it's important to realize that there are other people who can also handle the load and make lighter the load. And so therefore we can all be great together.
I would say that's a female thing for sure, right? I think men are much better at delegating.
Exactly. Like, we just want to do everything, even though we don't have the time for anything.
Yes.
And so just thinking about that, Dr. Morgan, what influence have our women leaders had on the evolution of goals and priorities in medicine, given the fact that we don't really have that much time, but yet we're trying to do so much? And what impact has that had, given the pandemic, on women's careers?
Yeah, I really think it goes back to what Dr. O'Regan was talking about, how women continue to encourage women. But I think it's also about the pipelines, the networks that women start to encourage young girls to be in the field of medicine and research. So I think those things are really important. I think about some of the programs that are out there that have really helped uplift women in the field, particularly young women in the field who are interested. So I think those are the impact and influences that women have had in the goals and priorities in medicine, and helping women move into specialties and subspecialties where there were no women before. And so we're thinking about orthopedics and neurosurgery and urology, and those subspecialties and specialties that women are starting to make inroads and have an impact in. And that's really been built on the shoulders of other women. And so that's very exciting to see. And the pandemic has really changed the way our lives have been. And some ways it's been positive. We look at how work has been reimagined. Who would have ever thought that majority of people could work from home and still be able to juggle some of the things they have? But it's also had a negative impact as well, because we've seen more women have to leave the workforce because they're not able to juggle work and having their children at home or taking care of a loved one during a time of COVID. So we've really reimagined the way work is being done. And so it's forced us to look at other priorities. But my hope is that as we move out of the pandemic, that I don't want to say that we want to go back to normal, but that we continue to do this reimagination of work and what it means to be productive, what it means for women on the promotion and tenure track, and how they can continue to build and move into leadership positions, how we redefine those policies and practices and procedures so that we can continue to make an impact and move into positions of leadership. So again, although things are changing and we're reimagining things, we as women need to have our voice there. We need to be at the table. We need to be helping to set these priorities and policies in a way that speak to how we can continue to grow, but how it makes it good for everybody. It makes it good for men, it makes it good for women, and most importantly, it makes it good for our families.
Definitely. And then so taking what Dr. Morgan and Dr. O'Regan have mentioned about the fact that we have to redefine like what it actually means to do some of these roles, and the fact that we actually have to be the change to have people realize that this is an issue for us. Dr. Nadelson, as the person who's actually held a number of these leadership roles, or somebody who's been the first of so many different things, like how have you actually been able to accomplish that when you have oftentimes a lot of people saying no, or just you have naysayers who don't necessarily think that you're appropriate for that role, but you yourself know that you're appropriate for that role, and you know that some of these changes are needed. Like, how do you actually go about establishing this?
Well, that's an important issue, I think, very important. I think, you know, I was in a system that is notorious for being difficult, but it turned out that that some aspects of it were actually favoring women, mostly because at Harvard we don't have a tenure track system. Everybody does their own work, and they're evaluated by peers. It's a complicated system, so that if you did your research and wrote your papers and did all the other things, you would have to be judged by that. So we still had very many fewer women being in that position, but we weren't bound by a time limit, which has been a problem for a lot of women who get kicked off the track. So that you can hang around for a long time. But what we started to do was really question the criteria, question what we were evaluating, how we were evaluating it. And one of the things that happened was that the two major teaching hospitals decided they would have offices for women's careers. And they were pushed into it strongly, and they managed to do it. And it really took off because we started to see many, many women with various career problems, and we were able to help them sort through it and figure out what to do. And how to do it. And, you know, we actually spoke for them in a lot of situations. And since the two of us were senior people by that time, it was a little bit harder to question us about some of it, because we had made our mark, so to speak, and we were pushing on this. And then we developed these offices, and the goal was to get women promoted and advanced in their careers and whatever it was they wanted to do. And so there was no model for us, so we had to invent it ourselves. So what I did with my branch was look at the women faculty we had, at which ranks they were, and meet with all the women who really wanted to talk about their careers. Nobody had really talked to them about that before. And so we looked at it, and we kept track of the areas that women brought up as problems. And you wouldn't be surprised by what they were. But we had to find solutions for it. We had to develop networks. We had to develop rules and for how people treated each other. And we found that the men were actually very supportive. Many of them now had daughters who were in medicine or thinking about it. And they really began to see it in a more human way and be more attached to it. And then we developed a fellowship program, which was opened initially only to women, but then we opened it to everyone. People could get at the beginning a $25,000 grant for their research or whatever they needed, but they had to have a project of some kind that would be approved of by a committee of their peers. what we found was there were dramatic differences that came out as we analyzed the data that we had collected over 5 years and 8 years. We moved it. It was very clear that having the offices and giving them money to run their programs, they could spend it any way they wanted that would help them write their papers or do what they needed to do. And so that we found that the women were being promoted at really much higher rates than they had ever been before. There was a dramatic difference. I mean, the men was kind of the same, even when it was later. They were doing well. Well, they were always doing well. But the women started to really advance, and we were really able to promote a lot of women into senior positions. And they would then work with other women. So we developed along a network of people who could help and set up programs and teach. I mean, I ran a seminar on writing for publication. And you had to have done it to teach it. It was a little, but the junior faculty were really incredibly interested and came to every session. They did all their practice papers. They really worked at it, and it paid off. It really made a big difference. And those programs are still going on in the hospital. We've made a dent in the system, but I think what we've seen now with the pandemic is what people have referred to, is that more of the women have moved back into traditional roles and not getting paid as much, dropping out a little bit part-time, really not accomplishing what they started out for, and they're unhappy about it. And the burnout rate of women physicians is higher than men, much higher. It says something. And that really needs to be addressed. And it's clearly childcare and flexible times, and there are ways to do it. We found ways to do it, but it has to be something people buy into and really feel dedicated to doing.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to mention that, we would like to do a lot of these things, but we also need to be supported in trying to do these things, and having the support of institutions, having the support of our healthcare organizations who are employing us, to give us the freedom and the laxity to actually take care of ourselves, take care of our patients, but also ascend the ladder at the same time without judgment for what we're doing. So, as opposed to everybody saying like, oh, motherhood is this really great thing, until you actually have to do things that go along with taking care of children. So until you actually have to pick them up from school, or you have to leave work, because something has come up, then you get judged for doing those same things that we actually pride some of our patients for doing. Like, we tell our patients that, they need to take care of themselves and that they come first, or else they can't take care of their families. But then as physicians, that kind of goes to the wayside, and we kind of forget, to practice what we preach. And I think it's really important for us to remember that and stay grounded to that. And then I think there's also importance of, all these institutions actually putting money and investing into some of our ideas. Because I think a lot of women have really great ideas, but if you have no funding, then you cannot move forward to implement any of these things. So you can't lift up other people. So in that vein, Dr. O'Regan, I was just wondering, what are some of your top priorities as the new chair of medicine, and what things do you think that you may be able to implement now in this current pandemic, where I feel like people are listening more to women, but at the same time, not necessarily hearing what women are saying?
Well, I hope I'm hearing what they're saying, but yeah, I think, first of all, I'm so honored. I've just got great faculty that I'm working with. It's been very exciting. not to go into, but, everything is really about our pillars of clinical care and research and education. So, I'm focused in all those areas. Obviously, a big part of this job is recruitment. I actually have a number of division chief positions empty right now, but I'm glad to say we just recruited a fantastic female candidate from North Carolina. So I'm very, very excited about that. So, that's super exciting. I think going back to what you were talking about, what we can implement now. So, I think that, if people want to work from home, that is totally reasonable. And actually, we sent out a survey to all of our faculty 2 weeks ago, asking them if they were working from home now, but more importantly, did they want to continue doing that? Because I think that we have to be flexible. Other institutions are being flexible, other workplaces are being flexible. And honestly, we know from the pandemic that people are just as productive, in fact, maybe more productive from being at home. But I think along with that, we, as you just said, Joanne, I think it's essential that we basically don't look down at people because they're working from home. I do feel there's still a little bit of that. I find that not acceptable at all. There's no reason for that. And I think, I don't mind where people work as long as they get the work done. So so I'm very interested in the survey, because I do think there's a majority of people who want to work at home to some extent, which I think is just wonderful. I'm totally supportive of that. Particularly, I think, as you alluded to, with regard to childcare, it gives you much more flexibility in your schedule. And, I think having to just go to a meeting in person, that's just going away at this point. So I think I don't want to take a lot of time, but there's a lot of different initiatives that we're doing, but I think that's an immediate one. I think, for our patients as well, implementing more telehealth. Unfortunately, we've gone back the other way. Most of the patients being in person, but, when you think about our catchment area here in UR, some of it's very rural. Those patients do not want to come up to Rochester. And I think it's our job to provide telehealth for them, particularly because some of our affiliate hospitals down the southern tier actually have rooms set up for telehealth. So that's something I'd really like to see happen, because I just, especially the winters we have here, it's not fair to bring people up if there's no reason for them to go up and we can do it remotely. So long answer, but it's kind of a couple of the immediate things that I would look at doing. So.
Oh, wow, I am looking forward to this. This sounds amazing. So thank you so much, Dr. Reagan. And then for all of our panelists, I'm going to ask the following question. So given that about 50% of medical school classes are women and have been so for about the past 10 years, why do you think there's so many underrepresented in positions of leadership? So whether that be as professors, section chiefs, deans, we are all striving, but it's just not like it's like we all get to make it to the doctor level, but when it comes to like having like a senior role within organizations, there seems to be a ceiling. And so how do we best confront and change that hidden curriculum in medical education and the implicit bias that seems to continue in the field of medicine? Like, how do we have our male colleagues start to acknowledge our importance and our value? And sometimes our female colleagues.
Yeah, Ruth, do you want to go or?
No, you please, Adrienne. I was hoping you'd say something.
Yeah, I think it's about doing things differently than we have done in the past.
Yeah.
To really take this holistic approach to hiring and to ensuring that when we put together search committees, that they're very diverse, that people have unconscious bias training, that we strive to have a very diverse pool of candidates and applicants in the pool, and how we source jobs, and particularly how we write jobs. The language that we use in writing many of our job descriptions really can become intimidating, particularly for people who are non-traditional. And so I think it really starts in how we begin to look at how we write and signal and source the work that we do, and do it in a holistic way, and bring people into the table that we haven't done before. And I think when we start to do that, we start to see a change in the way that hiring happens. Traditionally we've done faculty hires faculty, and it's the same people are hiring themselves basically. But when you make it a much more holistic approach and bring more people to the table to do that work, I think that we begin to see a change. And we have to prioritize that diversity on every level is what we are striving for, and making sure that happens.
And I would say, and I think I liked your point, Joanna, I think our job is to be role models and encourage, female faculty to think they can do it, because as we all know, as women, we're always thinking about reasons why we wouldn't be a candidate for a job. Men, on the other hand, are thinking, well, why wouldn't they pick me? And, of course, we're all going to get knockbacks, that happens everywhere. But I think it's important for us as female leaders to basically make sure that any female realizes that, she can move up the ladder, that there's no reason that she can't get these jobs like a man can. And, I think it's all about, kind of changing our culture, like Adrienne said, and, trying to just make sure that it is possible.
But, we found that since people didn't really know what the rules were about what level you could be at or which job you could, doing career advancement counseling became a huge part of my job. And people would come with all kinds of questions and concerns. And it was interesting that they had never even read the handbook about what they had to do. They just assumed, because people were negative to them and didn't try to support their interests. And that's been changing a lot. Now, one of the things I did with this is I, from the beginning, met with every department chair. And I came armed with my list of men faculty and women faculty, how long they'd been at rank. And I asked them what their plan was about various people. And nobody had ever been asked that before or talked about it. Made a huge difference. And it was not done with any animosity, that we were friends. I did a little bit of, being nice to them for a while to try to develop a relationship with them. I didn't, catch them. But being part of the environment and being a positive part and not attacking was very helpful. And once that started, we really developed a much better promotion system. And that the same with jobs, chief of a service or, whatever job there was, they weren't thinking about women. Well, if I came and talked to them about it and asked them, they would really think about it. So that kind of was a subtle thing. And I wasn't seen as a malevolent person. But,
Yeah. So I guess going down and taking what you've said, what tips can you guys provide to navigate trying to ascend the ladder while helping others along the way without being perceived by others as, you're stepping over somebody else or you're this angry woman? Like, how do we get to the point where you can actually attain a higher position without being seen as somebody who is just a B word for all intents and purposes? Because I feel like people like to equate the two. Like, if you want to do better in your field or you want to get more things or try to accomplish more, for some reason that's a bad thing, as opposed to if you just stay in your lane and do what establishment tells you to do, then that's seen more.
With one of the things about that is you really need to know what the rules are. How do people get promoted? Why do they get offered a job? What do people say when you ask them, why did so-and-so get this job? I thought you were thinking about somebody else, which I would say to them. But it has to kind of go through a system, and women have to be ready to step up and say, this is what I really want. This is what I'm going to work for, and make it clear, not back off. They'll get the support if they, make it known and that they're interested in one program or another. And I think that was very helpful to people. And we had a women's committee for the medical school. Sorry about this. But we had a women's committee at the medical school that was not bound to one hospital or another, but it was people from wherever they were working. And that was an important support group, having meetings together, looking at what's available, having people who would talk to them about what's available and how you might go about doing it. You know, how do you prepare a package for promotion?
Yeah, I agree with everything Dr. Nadelson said. And I think it too is about building your network and telegraphing, just like she said, that you are aspiring to a position and that women working together to help each other achieve the goals that they're trying to do. So again, and role modeling that and really understanding the policies and the practices and procedures for your institution. But I really believe in women amplifying women and helping us all get to that level that we're working toward and helping each other to do that.
Yeah, I was going to add, I saw the 2 comments about women being aggressive. Yeah, I don't think that's really true. And I bet you wouldn't hear a man saying that, right?
No.
So, you know, I think, you know, I don't consider myself very aggressive, I have to be honest. But going back to the promotion issue, you know, that's one thing I've really focused on because, you know, there's disparities in that. And one of them that comes up is, you know, women are more likely to be part-time, especially with the junior faculty. But if they have a CV that's good enough to be promoted from assistant to associate, does it matter whether they're part-time or not? Well, of course it doesn't. So I actually, you know, I sit down with my division chiefs and make sure that, you know, the female faculty are being considered for promotion the same time that they should be if they were male. And, you know, we still have a lot of work to do, I will tell you, here and other institutions, because when you look at the professor level, there's far less women. And also the amount of tenured female faculty is actually very low. It's a big disparity, actually. So that's one thing I'm trying to work on with regard to that, because I think that's very important, because there's no reason women should be promoted the same way that men are promoted.
Yeah, and I mean,
yeah, that's an interesting point to think about that, because the women often say, "Oh, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy doing whatever else they're doing," and they never stop to think of how much time does it take, what do I need to do that, and why can't I work it out with them? It is possible to do it. And it doesn't have to always be in one track.
Yeah, and that is true. And then I think the other thing that I hear a lot sometimes is like women will say that they don't have the experience for the position, or they don't think that they can do the position, as opposed to when I hear my male colleagues, it's just like, well, I'll just learn on the job. Like I'll just apply and then I'll just figure it out afterwards. And you realize like to us, like that just seems crazy. It's like, why are you going to accept responsibility for something that you have no clue how to do? And for them, they're just like, but why not? Like, I'll figure it out. And they end up excelling at it. So I think that's something that we as women also need to embrace. It's like, sometimes I think we hold ourselves back because we're expecting so much from ourselves. We just need to give ourselves some grace. Like, you know, yay, I might not know it right now, but I was smart enough to get through medical school and everything else and turned out okay. So I can also go for some of these positions. And then, hey, if I don't get the first one, I don't get the first one, but then I can keep on applying that. I'm not going to let that hold me back. But then also the interesting thing that I don't know, like how we're going to bridge this is, while we're trying to attain all of these things, how do we keep ourselves sane and prioritize our mental health and wellness while we're trying to attain all of these goals? Do you guys have tips about that?
Well, I'm going to say something that's going to be difficult, but one of the things that women tend to still do is they take on all the responsibilities at home, in their job, and they're always saying yes, and they're never burdening their partner. I didn't go through that. I started out at the beginning deciding I wasn't going to do that, and it worked. And I have 2 adult children and 4 grandchildren, and they're all fine. Nothing happens to them. But I think that we take on all the responsibilities. You hear it on the news every night. You know, how can I come home and cook for everybody? Well, don't people take turns sometimes? Don't you teach kids to cook some? They can make their own lunches and things like that, you know, but people feel guilty if they're doing what they think is the right job for, and they can get more by letting their partner know that this is serious and they really have to negotiate about it. And it, you know, doesn't work all the time, but, you know, it does work.
Yeah, and I think the same applies in the workplace, that you have to set boundaries and priorities for what you will do. Like I have this thing, I work out 5 days a week at 5 a.m.
Oh,
So
wow.
if the surgeons want to meet with me at 6:30, it's like either camera off or can we find another time? Because that to me is a sacred time for me. And so setting boundaries and being able to say no and not feeling guilty about it, because if you can't do everything, eventually things are going to fall apart and you're not going to be able to do the things that you promised to deliver on. So learning to set those boundaries in the workplace, I think is really important, and to be able to delegate too. If you have other people that you can delegate, or saying, you know, to another colleague, this is a great opportunity for you. You should, you know, I think this would be great for you to do. I can't do it right now. So I think those are other ways that you can prioritize and prevent burnout in the workplace, because it spills over into all parts of your life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We are horrendous at saying no. I mean, it's just not for words.
Yeah.
But at least in the department, we have had we've had one retreat focused on wellness, and you know, there's some things that are hard to fix, like, you know, most people complain about Epic and the electronic medical record system. But I think some of the stuff came up, and like I was saying earlier, I think, you know, the ability to be flexible in your schedule is so important. I think just to what Adrienne said, you know, people working out makes you feel good. You should be allowed to do that. And, you know, we already work 2 long hours, and I think she's completely correct to put her foot down on that one.
Yeah. And then we actually got another question from the chat stating that if you are in an administrative role, have you found that there are different expectations for the women leaders versus the male leaders, and feeling that the deck is also stacked against them and not getting the support that they need in the administrative role as well?
I mean, I can speak to that. I haven't really noticed that myself, I don't think. Maybe earlier in my career, to some extent, I do feel, you know, there was a time where, you know, I'm pretty sure it was actually when it came out that the salary scale was different for academic female physicians versus males. I do think there was some of that going on. But I do feel that I've been supported. I've always been in a minority. But I don't feel, at least in the last 2 years, that people were, that I was treated differently than the male faculty, but I may be unusual in that way. I'd be interested to hear what the others think about that. Great question.
I think also you have to have some perspective and sense of humor about some things that happen. I've had all kinds of strange encounters in strange places. And it's going to happen. And you just have to learn how to handle it and think that you can do it. That, you know, that the automatic trigger, one experience I had with a job was this was American Psychiatric Association. I wanted to be the editor-in-chief of the publishing after that job. And they were promising it to one of the men who I didn't think was even as qualified as I was. But I decided I was going to really tackle it. And what I said to them was, you know, I've been the president of this organization for the past year, and I've been through all of this. Why am I less qualified than he is? He hasn't even been any of those things. And I got an apology and the job.
Yeah. That's pretty great. So I feel like at the end of the day, it's like come down to we have to stick up for ourselves and believe in ourselves. Because if we don't believe in ourselves, then nobody else is going to believe in us. So we just have to advocate for ourselves.
Right.
So it's coming up on 7 o'clock. And you guys, this has been an awesome, awesome discussion so far. I'm very excited. I've learned a lot, and I feel like our guests have learned a lot. And I was just wondering if we can close out by giving any advice for pursuing potentially career path changes, because I think that's one of the things that the pandemic has kind of shown us that, hey, we might have thought that we had to do medicine, or maybe you had to do medicine a specific type of way. Like, do you have any suggestions about like how we can use our different skill sets, maybe in a different way that we haven't thought about that might work a little bit better for our times?
That is a great question. And for me, it's always about continue to strive and learn, to be that lifelong learner, to be open to any possibility that may come your way, and to really take that step. I watched a TED Talk yesterday about a woman who wanted to have a year of living with no fear. And so one of the things that she started off with was skydiving.
Oh,
You know, you talked about how, I mean, you could never get me to fly a plane, to jump out of a plane. But the thing was, it wasn't about her jumping out of a plane. It was about her taking a risk and a chance. And I think, you know, like Dr. O'Regan said, there's a lot of times when we feel like we're not qualified to do something, but take a chance to do it anyway, because you're going to have somebody there as a mentor who's going to help you and guide you through that. So always feel like you can take the risk and pivot if you need to do that. So I think walking courageously, being gracious, being humble, being open to new challenges, and listening, I think are really how I try to live my life as I walk through the path that I'm doing. I mean, I'm only trying to end racism at the University of Rochester as we know it. And when I talk about racism, it's not just about what's happening for Black and Brown people, it's about what's happening for women and people who are deaf and hard of hearing and people with different abilities and, you know, people in the LGBT community. And so all these people with multiple identities. So I think every day I have to put my big girl pants on, be brave, courageous, and just go for it. And if I make a mistake, I'm going to admit it. But at the same time, I'm going to continue to learn.
And I think I would say, you know, reach out to, you know, any female leaders that you have, because, you know, I think we're there for you to talk to. I the interesting thing in the chat about feeling that in order for us to succeed, we have to move institutions. I guess that's kind of been a little bit my story, because I've gone, you know, from 4 different institutions, but that's not right. And I think that, you know, it should be completely equal. You should have the same opportunities at your own institution, whether you're female or male. And I hope that we can change that culture going forward, because it just doesn't make any sense. Because that, of course, is holding women back as well, because sometimes it's harder for them to move, right? So it's an issue.
Yeah. And then some other questions I have is, what areas do you view needing improvement for women in medical education and leadership roles?
That's complicated. I think first, the most important thing is women have to accept that they can. And that's, you know, that means they need the support of people who are like us. They need to be able to find somebody who can help them and be accepting of it, and not afraid that they'll be misunderstood or voted down because they asked for some help. I think that's a really important part of how you can move this, but people need to know what your goals are.
Yeah.
And I just thought of one other thing, you know, I was just wondering people's opinion, just, you know, when you think, one of the things we all know is that, you know, traditionally when we speak up at meetings, we're not listened to, right? I mean, that's just the bottom line. I do wonder in this Zoom world, especially when you have to chat, whether we do feel more confident, and maybe, you know, people are paying more attention to what we're saying. I don't know what Dr. Nadelson or Adrienne think about that.
You know, that brings me back to what we were talking about before, I've been using Zoom a lot. I've been teaching on Zoom and I supervise residents. And one of the things that I see with that is that they're less afraid to speak up. It's a little bit not as it's not as difficult to be with a huge, you know, if you're with a huge group and you say something that's wrong, it's terribly upsetting. But in a smaller group or in that setting, you don't feel as judged. And so accepting supervision and other people's thoughts is a hard thing for younger people on the track to accept. But they, you know, they need to feel comfortable asking for help, for setting out goals, for, you know, trying to be part of it. And it is true that we speak more softly. We don't raise our hands as much. We're not as aggressive. And you can see it when you watch tapes of students in classrooms and, you know, what the men do and the women do. But you need to then have teachers who understand that.
Yeah, and I also think things are changing, and I'm watching this new group of young women coming in who are raising their voices. They are being advocates. They are on the front lines asking for and demanding change in a way that we haven't seen before. And so to me, I'm very encouraged. And I'm also encouraged by women who are mid-career who are picking up the mantle as well. Things are changing. The world is in a different place. And so to watch the advocacy of women asking and demanding for the things that they need, and I really believe reimagining how work is going to be done moving forward is really exciting. And so I just can't wait to see what happens and unfolds over the next few years, because I really do feel that our young women are saying, no more, I can do this and I want to do this and I'm going to live life by my own rules. And if that means, you know, it's different, it's going to be different for every woman.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say what happened in Boston last week was a major statement about that.
Yeah.
We elected the first woman mayor over 200 years. Boston's an old city. It's probably 200 years. But we've never had a woman mayor. We've never had a person of color who's the mayor. This woman happens to be Chinese origin from an immigrant family. And she's got everybody captured now.
Yeah.
That was astonishing because she's so skillful at it.
Yeah. And so I feel like it's all about encouraging each other, encouraging ourselves, advocating for ourselves, and not being afraid to put ourselves out there. If you each could share just one thing that each of us should take over the next year to help, you know, bolster ourselves when sometimes you feel like, oh, we can't do it anymore. And sometimes you feel that burnout. Like, what is the one thing that gets you each throughout the day? Like when you just feel like you have nothing to give, but like what actually gets you through the struggle?
I mean, for me, it's about the future. It's about my children, my grandchildren. It's about the future that I want for them, what I want for other women, what I want for families. So that keeps me going in the work that I do.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. It's the future. I do think that the climate's changing. I think it's a time where I think women are going to be seen as leaders more and more in medicine. I think it's very exciting.
All right, so I want to thank you, Drs. O'Regan, Dr. Nadelson, and Dr. Morgan for this awesome talk this evening. I also want to thank you, the attendees, who carved out time out of your schedule. As we have said before, like it's a struggle for us to make time to do things for ourselves. So kudos to you for actually making time to be with us this evening. I encourage you to stay connected by joining the Meliora Collective, the Women's Network and School of Medicine and Dentistry, as well as the Women in Medicine groups. There's a link in the chat. So if you don't know about it, just copy and paste in the chat and put it into your web browser. So this way it's there living for you. I want everybody to have an awesome evening and know that you're doing great work, even if it's not always recognized by others. But you know what? You're a U of R grad, so that makes you pretty awesome because biopsychosocial will carry you anywhere. So have an awesome evening, everybody.
Thank you.